sermon will be a window into her experience being a Unitarian Universalist minister in training attending a Christian seminary. As someone who was raised Southern Baptist in South Carolina, we sometimes call that the buckle of the Bible Belt, who attended a liberal Christian seminary and served as a decade as a pastor in liberal Christian congregations before becoming UU. I also have a lot to say about that topic as well, but I'll limit myself just to two unexpected encounters I had just this past week of stumbling into or over the Christian tradition. First, a few days ago, I heard an NPR headline, some of you may have also seen it or heard it, that caught my attention. It said, "Bible sales are booming. Political uncertainty might have something to do with it." The report noted that about 18 million Bibles have been sold so far this year in the U.S. That's an 11% increase over last year. And last year, sales were already up 20% from the year before. So it's up 11% over the previous 20%. So for the past 4 or 5 years, we've been in something of a Bible selling boom. With all those Bibles already out there in the world, I find this increase notable. I mean, I don't think it's particularly hard to put your hand on a Bible, but apparently people still need to keep buying them. In our anxious, polarized time, more people seem to be turning to the Bible, whether that's for comfort, certainty, or maybe out of curiosity. And that trend is being boosted by savvy marketing and a flood of niche editions. You can buy a Bible for women, for kids, for teens, for new believers, for skeptics, seemingly a Bible for everyone, many more editions than that. But I'll let you in on an open secret. If people were to actually read those Bibles that they're buying, they would find a lot of strange, curious, and sometimes disturbing passages. When I taught Introduction to the Hebrew Bible at the college level, that was most of what I had my students do. I would have them bring their Bibles to class. I'd be like, you can bring a Gideon Bible, that's in a hotel room. It's all the same. And I would have them open them up and actually just read what was in there. And especially those students who had grown up going to Sunday school were flabbergasted almost every time. They're like, I can't believe that is in the Bible. They check the cover. They'd be like, really? Because they're so used to only reading selectively, right? Only reading the parts that their Sunday school teacher tells them to read, the select, sanitized approach. The same is true for all the world's religions. The closer you look, the more they reveal their tangle of questions and contradictions, messy, complex, and at least to me and many others, endlessly interesting. The second unexpected encounter I had this past week with the Christian tradition was listening to the 50th anniversary edition of Patti Smith's landmark debut album, Horses, released on November 10th of 1975. Any fans out there? All right. It's widely regarded as one of the greatest and most influential albums in rock history, often cited as a foundational punk record. The opening track, Gloria, the very first line stopped me in my tracks. She sings, "Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine." I thought, there is an UU Easter sermon in that line alone. She continues, "My sins, my own, they belong to me." Whoever killed Jesus, that's their stuff. Don't put that on me. My sins, my own. Jesus is not taking away my responsibility for myself. 50 years ago in 1975, those lines scandalized some in the music press and electrified others. Critics called it everything from punk blasphemy to a declaration of artistic independence. Over the years, it's been read as Patti Smith's rejection of dogma, her embrace of personal responsibility, or simply her refusal to pretend that she needed saving in any way that anyone else insisted that she might. Smith herself has said that she wasn't rejecting spirituality, she was rejecting the idea of inherited guilt or borrowed salvation. And that line set the tone for an album that opened the door for women in punk to be unapologetically fierce, spiritual, and subversive all at once. Many of us, some of you grew up in Unitarian Universalism, some of you came from other traditions, but many people come to Unitarian Universalism carrying scars from one or more of the theologically conservative branches of Christianity. Wounds from teachings that shamed us, constrained us, or told us we were unworthy. And yet one of the gifts of our UU path is the invitation to heal those religious wounds and to sift through what we inherited with clearer eyes and gentler hearts. We don't have to keep what harmed us, but we also don't have to discard everything that shaped us. Sometimes I think, what would it look like if you have been wounded by Christianity? What it would look like to heal those religious wounds is that to be able to hear a passage from the Christian scripture in the same way you'd hear a Buddhist sutra, or the same way you'd hear something from the Vedas, to just hear it, to take what is useful and leave the rest, without having a lot of baggage or shadow around it. To draw wisdom from all the world's religions, including Christianity, retaining what is beautiful and nourishing, and again, setting aside the rest. In that way, even a line as provocative as Patti Smith's can become a doorway into curiosity, discernment, and a more spacious spiritual freedom. So in the minute of silence to follow, as we prepare to hear Michelle's reflections on her journey as a UU in Christian spaces, I invite you to reflect on, what is your journey with the Christian tradition, or with any tradition that shaped you? What have you carried that still nourishes your spirit? What are you carrying that you are ready to set down? And in this season of your life, where might there be an opening, however small, for healing, for curiosity, for reclaiming something in a new and life-giving way?
When I made my decision to attend seminary, and it took me a little while to make that decision, I embarked on an exploration of many different theological schools that might fulfill the requirement for my Master of Divinity degree. I explored both UU Identity seminaries, Starr King in California and Meadville Lombard in Chicago, and while their programs seemed interesting and enticing, I felt that it wasn't logistically the right move for me. At that time, both schools required at least some in-person time for classes, and I did not want to uproot my family or to leave them for long periods of time. And so I began to look for something that seemed like a good fit, but closer to home. And what I found was Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. Located on Massachusetts Avenue, it was close enough to my home in Northern Virginia, and it was included among a list of seminaries that provided a liberal Christian seminary experience. It was on a list provided to me by the UUA and seemed to be open to both UU students and a UU presence on campus. So in the fall of 2019, I completed my application for admissions and received acceptance the next February of 2020. Right, great time to go to seminary. Yeah, I indicated my intent to attend Wesley starting that fall, and with every intention, I planned to go. And then March hit, and the world shut down from the COVID-19 pandemic. I put off enrolling in my classes, like many of us, not sure what the future would hold. And late in that summer, I received a phone call from my admissions advisor. He had noticed that I hadn't enrolled for classes yet, and I explained I wasn't sure where I was in my discernment process. I didn't even know if I would be able to attend or where to begin. We talked for a while about what I was feeling and about the hesitations that I was having, and he patiently listened as I rambled on about these uncertainties with not only my own life, but the world as a whole. Just try it out, he said. Take 2 classes, see where it goes. He recommended that I start with a course in Hebrew Bible and that I choose some other course that spoke to me, that I found interesting. So, in the midst of a pandemic, I chose cultivating mental health as a spiritual practice. It seemed appropriate and timely. My advisor walked me through the enrollment process and stayed on the phone with me until I got the notification that my enrollment was complete. I secretly think that he thought if he let me off the phone, I might not follow through with it. And he might have been right. The world was a very uncertain time and place. And so with my enrollment process complete, I ordered my books, including a study Bible, and I was set to begin my seminary journey. But I was still filled with that trepidation about where I would fit in this Christian space. Would my Unitarian Universalist views and values be accepted in that world? Or would I feel that I never quite fit in? And would both things be true at once? The Hebrew Bible class with Dr. Denise Domkowski-Hopkins was amazing. I had not opened a Bible in many years, let alone studied it in any kind of capacity. Dr. Domkowski-Hopkins, having studied twice at the Ecumenical Institute for Theological Studies in the West Bank, brought a level of depth and insight to our studies that was both deeply academic and personal. She challenged us to consider biblical text not in just a singular way, not in just a literal surface level. She invited us to consider the type of text that we were reading. What was the genre? Was it poetry? Was it a myth? Was it an account of a people's understanding of the world? She asked us to think about what was the function of the text. What purpose did it serve? How did that text fit among what came before and what after? And where were the common themes? And then she also asked that we think about the context of the authors, what was known and unknown, and invited us to consider the context of the reader, both ourselves as readers and others who had encountered that passage. Where have others found meaning in the text? Where did we find meaning? And lastly, she reminded us that no one reading of the text can claim precedent over another, but rather every person's interpretation should be taken into consideration with all other readings. This felt like a true invitation to deeply explore these ancient texts and to add my own meaning and interpretation to the conversation. An interpretation that was filtered through the lens of my Unitarian Universalist faith. A UU classmate of mine and I have often joked since that first course together that our admissions advisor knew what he was doing when he enrolled us UUs in this course with this particular professor. Another biblical scholar and author I encountered on my seminary journey was Barbara Brown Taylor. Taylor is a New York Times bestselling author of Altar in the World, Learning to Walk in the Dark, and Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others. She is an Episcopal priest and an Emerita Buttman Professor of Religion and philosophy at Piedmont College. The banner on Taylor's website reads, "Writer, speaker, spiritual contrarian." Followed by, "Hello, I'm Barbara Brown Taylor. I see things you're not supposed to say." I discovered her website when I was actually preparing for this sermon, and I thought, no wonder her writings speak to my Unitarian Universalist heart. Taylor's book, Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others, was assigned reading for more than one of my classes at Wesley. And in this book, she writes this about biblical interpretation. She says, "This is one of the reasons why I remain a devoted student of the Bible, because what it says is so often not what I've been taught it says, or what I think it says, or what I want it to say. Scripture has its own voice." She goes on to say that the problem with every sacred text is that it has human readers. Consciously or unconsciously, we interpret it to meet our own needs, and there is nothing wrong with this, unless we deny that we're doing it. Taylor also writes that there is no such thing as religion, only religious people who embody the scripts of their faith as differently as dancers embody the steps of a dance. Until someone grabs a partner and heads to the dance floor, the tango is no more than a list of steps on the wall. The same is true of faith. We have inherited a sacred pattern, a series of artful steps, but until someone finds a partner and gives it a try, it is an idea, not a dance. Each in their own way, Barbara Brown Taylor and Dr. Hopkins were asking those of us in these courses to explore these texts and to find our own meaning in them, a concept that deeply resonated with my UU faith. Sometimes I think that those of us as Unitarian Universalists, especially those of us who come through those religious wounds, begin our Unitarian Universalist identities based on what we are not. What is it that we reject? It makes sense that we would reject something that has caused us pain, of course. But often that means that we leave behind the parts that are beautiful, the parts that bring meaning to our lives. We can reclaim those lost parts of our previous identities if they bring us meaning and connection. We can reframe them in a new way, a life-giving way. Our Unitarian Universalist faith asks each of us to determine for ourselves that which we hold as sacred. So while there was this invitation to explore and interpret biblical text in seminary, seminary also involved a great deal of translation for me. I wrestled with ideas of salvation, finitude and fallenness, being born again. I was exploring some of this language with a small group in my last congregation when the idea of being saved came up. In my mind, I immediately rejected that idea, that I have been saved, kind of like the people who were interpreting the song from the musician, right? But as we explored this conversation and people in our small group were sharing, someone said to me, "I am saved every day." And I thought, wow, things happen all the time. And I feel like I was saved in one way or another, this person was adding. And Barbara Brown Taylor says this about salvation. She says, salvation is not something that happens only at the end of a person's life. Salvation happens every time someone with a key uses it to open a door he could have locked instead. When I view salvation in this way, yes, I agree. I am saved every day, in big and small ways. The ideas of finitude and fallenness also often come up in Christian spaces. Finitude, the idea that we are finite beings, that our lives have an end, that's a pretty easy one for me to accept. But for many Christians, fallenness stems from a doctrine of original sin, and that one was harder. The idea that because Adam and Eve sinned against God, they and all humanity that came after them were somehow flawed and fallen. This idea of original sin was one that I struggled with even when I identified as a Christian. I never could quite come to terms with the idea that the quest for truth, meaning, and purpose could result in something that was sinful, or that the world's suffering was the result of two people in a garden, an apple and a snake. For me, fallenness is when we are not in covenant with one another. When we do things that directly or indirectly cause harm to one another, then we have fallen out of covenant and relationship. We must repair those relationships. I also recall a preaching professor who proclaimed in one of my courses that the role of the preacher is to preach the gospel. My immediate thought was, well, I guess I'm out. I can't be her definition of a preacher. But then she followed up by saying that each of us must determine what is our gospel. She shared her gospel, which of course was rooted in Christian teachings in the person of Jesus, because that is her truth. But she also included justice and liberation for all people. And so I began to reflect on that question, what is my gospel? And I find that my gospel is rooted in the belief that we are better together than we are apart. That, as Dr. King said, we are woven together in a single garment of destiny. That when we together live into the values of our Unitarian Universalist living tradition, that we have the power to liberate and transform. We have the power to liberate and transform this hurt and broken world, to be the beloved community that we dream of. This is my gospel. This is a gospel that I can preach. And so here I am today, standing before you, sharing with you my truth on this Sunday. And here we all are gathered together, a people of many truths. This Sunday marks in the Christian calendar the first Sunday of Advent. In the Christian tradition, Advent marks the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas and the birth of Jesus. It is often described as a time of preparation, of reflection, a time of waiting. Our UU traditions grew out of these Judeo-Christian roots. So what does the Advent season mean for UUs? Many Christians and some UUs mark the weeks of Advent by lighting candles in an Advent wreath. Each of the candles marks a different theme of hope, peace, love, and joy. These are themes that are echoed in our UU tradition. But some years, this year being one of them, if I'm being honest, it's the waiting part I struggle with. It seems like every day there is some form of violence, hatred, and injustice in the news. And waiting doesn't seem like the best action right now. In preparing for this sermon, I found a piece that was published as part of the Braver, Wiser series and distributed by the UUA. I wish I could say that it was written recently, but it was first published on December 7th, 2022 by Megan Lloyd Joyner. 3 years later, its words still ring true for me. And so I will leave you with this Advent reflection titled The Waiting Time. It begins with a quote from the Reverend Victoria Safford. "Now is the moment of magic, when people beaten down and broken, with nothing left but misery and candles and their own clear voices, kindle tiny lights and whisper secret music." The Reverend Victoria Safford. And these words from Megan Lloyd Joyner. In the Christian calendar, Advent is a time of waiting and preparation for the coming of the Christ child. The story from the first century Palestine tells us that the birth of Jesus comes hope, love, the undoing of the status quo, a new reign of peace on earth. At this time of year, we are invited, as weary people have done since the beginning of time, to kindle tiny lights and whisper secret music, to cradle our hopes like newborn children, to wonder what love looks like in practice, to await a new era with patience and preparation. This year, we might not feel like waiting is the best move. We might cry out and lament for the lives and rights taken without account, joining our voices with all who cry for justice and peace. This year, sitting quietly in the midst of chaos might feel close to impossible. Finding the music or the magic in this season of waiting can be difficult for many of us, not just this year, but any year. For how does one sit quietly when life can be so unkind? What about the times when we wait for a word of family in conflict zones, of an injured friend or a dreaded diagnosis? The times when we wait for illness to set in or for a child who does not arrive. In times like these, we might find ourselves wishing the time would pass more quickly to get us to the other side of this nightmare. How do we live in that kind of waiting time? Advent challenges us not to just wait, but to wait actively, to do the work of preparing hearts and to till the soil that awaits seeds of hope and love. Advent encourages us to be present in each moment of waiting. The moment of magic, the time we have been waiting for, is now. Not some future date, not at the end of the Advent calendar, not the hour that the light begins to return, or that the long-awaited morning of presence. The mystery, the excitement, the beauty of this season are all found in the waiting time. And so we wait, allowing ourselves to be fully present to all that is happening in each moment. And when we do, we join our lives and our breath and our hearts with all who are waiting for justice, waiting for peace, waiting for a world reborn.
Give one final just hop, skip, and a jump about kind of a shift with the Christian tradition. As I was growing up, again, Southern Baptist in South Carolina, we were at church like 3 times a week and special conferences. And I wonder if any of you ever went to a conference called Evangelympics. So this is one of the things they subjected us to. So evangelism plus Olympics, and we were like really hammered with the importance of sharing the Southern Baptist, converting people. And we were all given this Bible in this really charged situation, and you carry this in your backpack, and then you will know in your heart when you meet someone that you need to share this with. And so I actually took that really seriously, more or less. I carried that in my backpack for like 3 years, but the thing is, I never felt in my heart that I met anyone that would have been better off with me sharing. So I guess that says something, right? So that's vignette 1. The second is, you mentioned taking a Hebrew Bible class. My sophomore year in college, I took a class called The Old Testament Prophets by one of the 2 greatest teachers I've ever had in my life. His name's Jeffrey Rogers, just absolutely electric in the classroom. And I remember about halfway through that course, and there's this real kind of paradigm shift he was challenging us with, was to see the Hebrew prophets as not primarily about predicting the future, but about social justice in their present, which had implications for social justice in our present. And it was really just opening things up for me, but also kind of explosively deconstructing for me all the stuff I'd been taught growing up. There's a lot to say about that, but I would say there's one moment that I'll never forget in that class when someone was just really resisting that whole progressive way of reading the Bible, that academic way, and was just really hammering on it. And I felt this anger within me. Like he was being, I think then and I think now, I could just feel waves of aggressive stupidity coming off of him, and I remember one of my friends putting their hand and saying, "It's okay," because I was just gripping the desk. I wanted to throw my desk across the room. I was just like, this, because it wasn't just about him, right? It was about all of the aggressive stupidity that had been piled on me for years. I wasn't really just angry at him. I was angry at him, but it wasn't just that. Thankfully, I did not throw my desk across the room. And the final thing is a few years later, when I went to seminary, I was offered this really plum youth ministry job at a really nice congregation that was by the director of admissions. And I almost said yes to that, and then I realized I have no business guiding young people on their spiritual journey right now. I am too angry. I have no answers for these people. I have only anger. Now, 3 years later, after going to seminary was this real time. College was really about deconstruction, and seminary was about how do I reconstruct with integrity. And I was a children and youth minister for 7 years and loved it, and it was a real healing time for me. But all that to say, it can be a journey, and what I wish for you is healing from your religious trauma, whatever that is, so that you can come to a place really of freedom around it. So as we prepare to go into the rest of this day and into the week to come, may you continue your journey with love at the center. Care for one another, care for this one earth, do justice and make peace. And whatever taste or touch you've had in this time and place of even just a little more hope or love or peace or joy, that goes with you out into the world. We are different for having spent this time together. And even in this very hard time in the world, continue to look for and savor all that remains good and true and beautiful. May you live boldly. May you live with thanksgiving.